In this episode, we are taking on a topic that sounds simple at first, but becomes much more important once you start hearing these words used in real organizations. People often say audit, assessment, and review as if they all mean the same thing, but in practice they are not identical, and understanding the differences helps you think much more clearly about how organizations examine technology, controls, and risk. For a brand new learner preparing for the Certified Information Systems Auditor (CISA) certification, this matters because exam questions often depend on recognizing the purpose, depth, and formality of what is being performed. It also matters professionally because the wrong kind of evaluation can leave the organization with the wrong kind of confidence. A business may need formal assurance in one situation, a broad evaluation in another, and a focus check in a third. Once you understand the major types of audits, assessments, and reviews, you start to see that these are not just different labels. They are different tools for learning what is true about a process, a system, or a control environment. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is with the idea that organizations need many ways to examine themselves because no single method answers every question. Sometimes leadership needs strong, evidence-based assurance that controls are working as expected and that conclusions can stand up to scrutiny. At other times, management needs a quicker or more exploratory look at where weaknesses may exist, what maturity level a process has reached, or how prepared a team is for a coming requirement or change. In still other cases, the organization may simply need a narrower look at a specific activity, document, or decision to confirm whether it aligns with expectations. These differences in purpose shape the kind of work that should be performed. A formal audit usually carries more structure, independence, and documented evidence than a general assessment, while a review may be narrower, lighter, or more focused on a particular area of concern. The important lesson for beginners is that the form of evaluation should match the question being asked. When the purpose changes, the right method often changes too. An audit is usually the most formal of the three. It is a structured evaluation designed to determine whether a process, control, system, or environment meets defined criteria and whether the evidence supports a reliable conclusion. Audits are often risk-based, which means they focus attention where control failure or process weakness would matter most to the organization. They tend to involve planning, defined scope, established criteria, evidence collection, testing, documentation, and a final communication of results. This formality is not just for appearance. It exists so that the audit result can be trusted by leadership, oversight bodies, regulators, or other stakeholders who need more than a general impression. In a well-run audit, the conclusion is not based on mood, rumor, or casual observation. It is based on disciplined work that can be explained and defended. That is why audits occupy such an important place in governance and assurance. They help organizations replace assumption with evidence and replace vague confidence with a conclusion grounded in professional method. An assessment is usually broader or more exploratory than an audit, though it can still be very valuable and very serious. Assessments often aim to understand current conditions, identify strengths and weaknesses, estimate readiness, compare a process against expectations, or highlight areas where more formal work may later be needed. They may not always carry the same level of independence, testing rigor, or formal reporting that an audit requires, but that does not make them weak or unimportant. In many organizations, assessments are how management first discovers where risk may be growing, where a program is immature, or where improvement should begin. For example, a security program assessment might look at whether important control areas exist and how consistently they are managed, even if it does not test each control with the same level of formal evidence as a full audit. A readiness assessment might examine whether a team is prepared for a new requirement, a major system implementation, or an external examination. In that sense, assessments often help answer how ready are we or where do we stand rather than can we formally conclude this control is effective. A review usually sits somewhere else again. Reviews are often narrower, lighter, or more focused on a specific activity document set, event, or condition. A review may examine whether a process appears to align with expectations, whether certain records were completed appropriately, whether an issue identified earlier has been addressed, or whether a proposed change deserves further attention before moving ahead. In many cases, a review is less intensive than an audit and less exploratory than a broad assessment. It is often performed to answer a more targeted question. A manager might request a review of recent user access approvals, a post-incident review of what happened during a disruption, or a review of change records for a specific time period. These efforts can still be highly useful, especially when time is limited or when leadership needs focused insight without the full structure of a major engagement. The key for beginners is to hear the difference in intent. A review often checks or examines something specific, while an audit more often supports formal assurance, and an assessment more often supports broader evaluation or improvement. One important way to classify audits is by who performs them and for whom they are performed. Internal audits are conducted from within or on behalf of the organization to give leadership an independent view of controls, risk, and process effectiveness. Their audience often includes management, executive leadership, or the board, and their purpose is to strengthen governance by helping the organization understand itself more honestly. External audits come from outside the organization and often serve a different purpose, such as satisfying outside stakeholders, supporting financial reporting, or addressing contractual or regulatory expectations. This distinction matters because the source of the work influences how independence is viewed, how results are used, and who depends on the conclusion. For the learner, the main point is that both internal and external audits can be meaningful, but they do not always exist for the same reason. Internal audit often helps the organization improve and maintain oversight from within, while external audit often provides assurance or verification to parties beyond the day-to-day management team. Another major type is the compliance audit, which focuses on whether the organization is following required rules, obligations, or internal expectations. These obligations may come from laws, regulations, contracts, policies, or industry requirements, and the audit examines whether the organization's behavior matches what it is supposed to do. Compliance work is especially important because many organizations face serious consequences if required safeguards are missing or if required processes are not being followed consistently. A compliance audit is not only about avoiding punishment. It is also about demonstrating discipline and accountability in areas where the organization has clearly stated obligations. For example, if a company is required to protect certain data in specific ways or maintain records that support control oversight, then the audit will examine whether those things are actually happening. For beginners, it is helpful to remember that compliance audits are criteria-driven in a very direct way. The central question is often not what would be nice or efficient, but whether the organization is doing what it is required to do. Operational audits are another important category, and they focus less on formal compliance alone and more on whether processes are functioning effectively, efficiently, and in line with business needs. This kind of audit asks whether work is being carried out in a way that supports objectives, uses resources responsibly, and reduces avoidable risk. In the technology space, an operational audit might examine areas such as change management, incident handling, backup processes, service management, access administration, or system monitoring. The auditor is not just checking whether a document exists. The auditor is asking whether the process works well enough to support the organization reliably over time. This makes operational audits especially valuable because many business failures come not from the absence of policy, but from weaknesses in daily execution. A process may look strong in theory while being inconsistent in practice. Operational audits help reveal those gaps by connecting process design to actual performance, business impact, and control reliability in the real world. There are also audits and assessments tied to the development and implementation of systems, and these are important because many control problems begin long before a system goes live. A project audit may look at governance, requirements, approvals, testing, change handling, or whether the project is being managed in a disciplined way. A readiness assessment may examine whether a system, team, or support process is truly prepared for production use. A post-implementation review may occur after launch to determine whether objectives were achieved, whether expected controls are functioning, and whether problems emerged that were not obvious during development. These types of examinations matter because a system that appears technically complete may still be weak from a control, governance, or operational standpoint. Beginners should pay attention to this because it reinforces a broader lesson from the certification. Assurance does not begin only after something is fully built and running. It can and should appear throughout the life cycle, from planning and development through launch and ongoing operation. Security-focused assessments are also common, and they usually aim to understand how well the organization is protecting important systems and information. These can vary widely in depth and formality. Some are broad program assessments that examine governance, access control, monitoring, resilience, incident response, and related areas to identify strengths, weaknesses, and maturity. Others may be more targeted evaluations of a particular environment, process, or control area. The important thing for beginners is to recognize that a security assessment is often designed to identify posture, readiness, or gaps rather than issue the same kind of formal assurance conclusion that an audit would. It may serve as a management tool, helping leaders decide where to invest time and resources before an incident, an external review, or a major change creates more pressure. In that sense, assessments often support improvement. They can reveal where the organization is exposed, where controls are uneven, or where future audits may need to look more deeply. A strong assessment can therefore be an early warning signal as well as a planning instrument. Reviews can also take many forms, and their usefulness becomes easier to appreciate once you stop thinking of them as lesser versions of audits. A follow-up review may check whether a previously reported finding was remediated and whether the corrective action actually solved the problem. A management review may examine reports, exceptions, metrics, or approvals as part of ongoing oversight. A peer review in a professional setting may evaluate the quality of work performed by an audit function or a related team. A document review may focus on whether policies, procedures, or evidence records align with expectations before a formal audit occurs. Each of these reviews serves a narrower but still important purpose. They help maintain visibility, reinforce accountability, or provide focused insight without always launching a full formal engagement. For beginners, this is a helpful reminder that strong control environments depend on many layers of checking. Not every concern needs a major audit, but smaller reviews often help the organization detect drift early and maintain better day-to-day discipline. A point that often confuses learners is the relationship between formality, independence, and evidence. In general, audits tend to require stronger independence, more defined criteria, deeper evidence gathering, and more formal reporting than assessments or reviews. Assessments may be more flexible and may focus more on current condition, maturity, or readiness than on issuing a definitive conclusion about control effectiveness. Reviews may use less extensive testing and narrower scope because they are answering a more specific question. Still, these are not rigid boxes. Some assessments can be very disciplined, and some reviews can be highly significant. The better way to think about the distinction is to ask what level of assurance is needed, how defensible the conclusion must be, and who will rely on the result. If a board, regulator, or major outside party needs strong assurance, the work usually needs greater formality. If management mainly needs directional insight or an early view of gaps, an assessment or focused review may be more appropriate. Matching the method to the need is part of professional judgment. There are several common misconceptions worth correcting before they harden into bad habits. One is the belief that an assessment is always casual or informal, when in fact some assessments are detailed, structured, and extremely influential in shaping management decisions. Another misconception is that an audit is automatically better than every other type of evaluation. Audits are powerful, but they are not always the best tool for every purpose, especially when leadership needs a quick view of readiness, a maturity snapshot, or a focused follow-up on one issue. A third misconception is that reviews are minor and therefore unimportant. In reality, a well-timed review can identify a problem early enough to prevent a much larger failure later. Beginners also sometimes assume these categories are separated by perfect walls, but real organizations may blend them in careful ways. The most useful mindset is not to memorize labels mechanically. It is to understand the purpose, scope, level of assurance, and likely audience for the work being performed. Once those elements are clear, the label usually becomes easier to understand. As you connect these ideas back to the broader CISA perspective, the deeper lesson is that audits, assessments, and reviews all exist to help organizations see themselves more clearly. They differ in formality, independence, depth, and objective, but they all support the same larger need for accountability and informed decision-making. An organization cannot manage technology well if it never checks whether controls are working, whether programs are mature, whether requirements are being followed, or whether previously known weaknesses were actually corrected. That is why these different forms of evaluation coexist. A mature organization usually uses all of them at different times for different reasons. The exam expects you to recognize those distinctions because they influence what kind of evidence is appropriate, what kind of conclusion can be supported, and what kind of response leadership should expect. Once you understand that, questions about types of audits, assessments, and reviews become much less confusing. They stop sounding like a vocabulary test and start sounding like real choices about how organizations learn the truth. As we close, the most important thing to carry forward is that these terms describe different ways of examining reality, not just different names for the same activity. Audits provide structured, evidence-based assurance against defined criteria. Assessments usually provide broader evaluation, readiness insight, or maturity understanding that helps management see where improvement is needed. Reviews offer narrower or more focused examination of a specific issue, process, document set, or follow-up concern. Internal and external work serve different audiences, while compliance, operational, project, security, and follow-up efforts each address different needs within the larger control environment. For a beginner, that is the big picture that matters most. The question is never only what is this called. The better question is what is the organization trying to learn, how strong must the conclusion be, and who will depend on the result. When you think that way, the differences between audits, assessments, and reviews become logical, practical, and much easier to apply both on the exam and in the real world.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.